everybody, I am TL Painter, and today I thought that I would do a video about my reading list for 2022. I know that's pretty ambitious. 2022 is a long period of time, but I don't really do TBR videos on my channel like most booktubers do. So instead, I just wanted to do one for the year. These are the stories that I intend to read throughout the year of 2022. And I'm probably going to say 2021 several times during this video because I wrote 2021 multiple times when I was writing the blog post that is associated with this. So bear with me. If I say 2021, I probably mean 2022. Probably, maybe not always. Let's dive into it. These are the books that I plan to read in 2022. The list is subject to change, and there are definitely more stories than what I will list here on my list already. First up is science fiction. I actually read a considerable amount of science fiction last year, which is weird for me because that's not really a genre that I typically enjoy. The main science fiction series that I read last year was the Red Rising series, which I didn't very much enjoy the first half of, but the second half I have really been loving, and I'm excited for the third book. So most of last year, especially the latter half of it, was spent reading science fiction. So I've really cut down on science fiction in my list this year to make some room for my favorite genre, which is fantasy. But these are some of the science fiction books that I have decided to include on my list and that I'm excited to read. First off is The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. The series is about a security robot that manages to override itself, if I'm understanding correctly, and in overriding itself, it gains independence, and then it uses that independence to watch soap operas. That's just the general summary that I've gotten. I haven't read any more on it, and I haven't gotten any spoilers. Please don't spoil it for me. I'm really excited about this one because the idea of a robot gaining independence and then using it to be very human just sounds like something that appeals greatly to me. But I feel like there's got to be something more to it and some more themes explored if it has this many books in the series. So I'm excited to see what is explored here and what kind of ideas are going to come up while I'm reading that story, and just how it's going to impact me, because I love being impacted by stories. And for this one to be so beloved and be a story that so many people have recommended to me, there has to be some depth to it beyond just me reading about a robot watching some soap operas. I'm confident that this is going to be a story that has a considerable amount of depth, and I cannot wait to get into it. I also have two older science fiction novels that are on my list, specifically Snow Crash and Neuromancer. Both of these are books that I've wanted to read for a long time. They were on my Christmas wish list. It's after Christmas now, but I'm filming this before Christmas, so I'm not sure if I got those or not. If I did, you can definitely expect me to be reading those at some point in 2022. I'm excited to read these, especially Snow Crash, because from what I've heard, Snow Crash has a lot of the sort of themes that I enjoy, particularly with absurdist humor. I don't know if that's accurate or not, it's just what I've heard. So I'm really looking forward to that one. I can't wait to get into it and find out what these books are about. Now, just because I'm really excited about Snow Crash doesn't mean that I'm not eager to get into Neuromancer. Neuromancer is one of the original cyberpunk stories, and I'm really looking forward to diving into that and seeing what it's all about and exploring some of the themes that are usually brought up in cyberpunk in a much older work, especially considering that one of the settings that I have been workshopping for a future novel of mine is a cyberpunk setting. In fact, my short story Beneath Magenta Rain is set in this world, so consuming a little more of the cyberpunk genre is definitely going to help me out with writing that and making it a little more believable and seeing what it is that makes the genre tick. And that's pretty much it for the science fiction that's on my list right now. I'm sure that I'm going to be adding some more. In fact, I have several open spots. I just haven't quite decided what it is that I'm going to fill those spots with. I've gotten multiple recommendations, including things like Hyperion and The Expanse and all of that. So I will probably be adding some of that to my list in the future, but I'm trying to keep some of those spots open, especially for new releases that I'm eager to read. But that is the science fiction that I have on my list for 2022. Like I said, I am dialing it back. So we're going to have a little less science fiction and a lot more fantasy, which that's what I'm going to get into now, the fantasy that I have on my list for 2022. First up is John Gwynne, and I am really excited to start reading him. I have heard so much about his works. I am really eager to sit down with his books and just take them in. And I have heard that if you don't really like the first series, you may still enjoy Shadow of the Gods, which is another series that he has. So if I don't really enjoy the Faithful and the Fallen series that he has, I will still be reading Shadow of the Gods to see if I like that. I also really want to get Hunger of the Gods, the book that's coming out later this year, because it has a puppy on the cover, and I'd like to have that on my shelf. I will also be reading Fonda Lee this year. As you can see over here, can you see that? Right here? These boys. I bought the Greenbone Saga, and I'm really excited to get into these. I love that I was able to support an author who seems so passionate about her work from the interviews that I have seen of her. Usually when an author loves writing and loves her craft so much, you can see that bleeding into the work itself. And I'm really excited to read her writing because of that. And I'm actually going to start reading that here very soon, and will then get my review out shortly. So keep an eye out for that. In addition to the books by Fonda Lee and John Gwynne, I'm also going to be reading some Joe Abercrombie this year. Joe Abercrombie, from what I've heard, tells some very dark fantasy stories and is excellent at it. The violence and brutality and just general darkness that he puts into his books is supposed to be just beyond anything else that we've ever seen. He's supposed to be the writer that you go to when you want a dark fantasy story. And I really like that. I appreciate dark fantasy and do believe that dark content has its place in the world if it is done properly. And from the sounds of it, Joe Abercrombie is doing it properly. So I'll be reading some of his books, beginning with the First Law trilogy. If I remember right, that is the first series that I'm starting with. So I will be sitting down with that and reading some Joe Abercrombie books this year. And then to top off my fantasy, I'm going to be reading some more Brandon Sanderson. I have already read Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive up to Rhythm of War. So what I'm planning to do is just reread the Stormlight Archive, and then I want to read Rhythm of War after that and get reviews out for actually all of the books in the Stormlight Archive thus far. I'm going to be doing that a little bit later this year, probably late spring to early June. It's my current plan for that. I think this is going to be pretty easy because one, Brandon's books are really easy to read. His writing style is very plain and approachable, so anybody can get to it, and that is something that he wants for his writing. And that makes it really easy not only to read them the first time, but even easier to read them the second time through. So I should be able to just burn through these books and have it as a nice palate cleanser, especially since it's a story that I've already experienced. I'm looking forward to just kind of relaxing after I've read so much new content, just returning to an old favorite and getting into that. So I will be rereading the Stormlight Archive this year and then reading Rhythm of War, the fourth Stormlight book, after that. Lastly, I do have a couple of outliers that I wanted to talk about. These are just books that don't really fit into the categories above or that I wanted to pull out and talk about individually. First one is going to be Sword of Cajun. I believe it's Cajun. Pretty sure Cajun. Sword of Cajun. If it's not, it's Kagan. I'm pretty sure it's Cajun. Sword of Cajun is a book that comes recommended to people who enjoyed the Ghost of Tsushima game, which, if you don't know, was my favorite game that I played last year and is in fact my #1 video game right now that I've played of all time. I loved Ghost of Tsushima. It was a beautiful game, a wonderful story, and I enjoyed it so much. So a book that is supposedly written in a way that is going to appeal to people who enjoyed that game, I'm definitely going to want to sign up for. And if I enjoyed it enough, the author M.L. Wang has tons of other books in her catalog that I would love to read. I believe that Gunpowder Magnolia is one of the other books that is in her repertoire that I really want to read and that looks really interesting. So if I enjoyed this book, I will definitely be picking up more works from her and possibly adding them to my 2022 reading list. That's why I have so many open slots left. In addition to that, I have a couple of contemporary young adult novels that I want to read, specifically Eleanor and Park and The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Now, these are very different from any of the other books that I read, but they are not so different from the book that I have written, How I Ruined My Life. I think that's important for me to understand better the kind of content and approach that authors are taking when they are writing in this genre, because it's not a genre that I'm very familiar with. Now, these are two works that are very well regarded, particularly for Perks of Being a Wallflower, which is an older work. It came out in the late 90s and has a film adaptation. I think Eleanor and Park is getting a film adaptation, but Perks of Being a Wallflower has had a film adaptation for about 10 years now. I know very little about either of these books other than their genre and that they are very much loved. Now, I'm not entirely certain if I'm going to read Eleanor and Park. It's just a book that I'm interested in reading, but I will be reading Perks of Being a Wallflower just because it is a classic book in this genre, and so it's kind of a crime in my opinion that I haven't read it if it's a genre that I'm interested in contributing works to. So I'll be reading that for sure, and possibly Eleanor and Park. I haven't really decided or settled on that, especially if it's going to end up taking up a slot that another book I want to read is going to take up. That's one that I think I will pretty easily remove from my reading list, but it is a book that I'm interested in reading. The last thing that I want to talk about is December. December, I have a very special reading list that is going to start in December and go through much of 2023. I haven't totally decided on what my approach to this is, but I'm very excited to unveil it, and we'll be revealing what is going to be coming up for the channel probably later this fall in 2022. I know that's a long way off, but pretty much everything from December into much of 2023 is a book that I have already decided what I'm going to be reading for that section of the year. I'll probably take some breaks here and there from that project, but it is something that I'm really excited about, and I can't wait to get started. So stay tuned for that. I know you're going to be staying tuned for a long time, but the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to this channel. And with that being said, thank you so much for taking the time to check out my reading list. Everything is obviously subject to change, but these are the books that I plan to read here in 2022. If you'd like, you can check out another video from me right here. And until next time, bye.